Hello and welcome to Rails Trails Conservancy's webinar, Active Transportation Transforms America. This is the case for increased public investment in walking and biking. I'm Kevin Mills, the Vice President of Policy at Rails Trails, and I'll be your moderator. My guests with me today are Leslie Richards, the Secretary of the Pennsylvania Department of Transportation and the Chair of the Active Transportation Council for the National Association of State DOT Heads, also known as Ashta. We have Martha Williams, who's the Director of Montana Fish, Wildlife and Parks, and her department has responsibility for trails and greenways throughout the state of Montana. And we also have Jim Kolb, who's a partner at Summit Strategies and a respected federal transportation policy expert. He was staff director for the Highways and Transit Subcommittee of the House of Representatives of the Congress from 2007 to 2014. I'm going to begin with a brief overview of our research findings before turning to the panel. Today, RTC is releasing Active Transportation Transforms America. It's a study of the national benefits and the economic value of public investment in active transportation. RTC pioneered quantification of the benefits of active transportation over a decade ago. And since then, many communities and states have connected active transportation infrastructure. We've seen a spike in demand in many of those places. And we've seen a rise in shared micromobility and a growth in pedestrian and bicycle fatalities and serious injuries. So we've analyzed all these trends and are pleased to present our all new and unique findings and analysis that are based on the latest data and examines more factors and utilizes more definitive scientific findings to provide a comprehensive snapshot of the impressive benefits that flow from investing in trail and active transportation networks. So we used conservative assumptions and methodologies, and our peer review study found that active transportation is already providing a huge return on investment, with public investments made over a period of decades paying off with economic and social benefits that are far greater than the aggregate federal investment every single year now and going forward. And those benefits could more than double under our modest scenario and quadruple under our substantial scenario. We documented four main types of benefits. The first is mobility. Investing in safe and convenient active transportation connections enables more people to access destinations by walking and biking or shared micromobility. This provides more transportation choice, better serving those who do not drive, and providing affordable mobility in place of some car trips. This more inclusive transportation system could avoid an additional 100 billion miles driven every year under our substantial scenario. And the key to this potential to reduce driving and congestion is the prevalence of short trips. Half of the trips taken in America are within a 20-minute bike ride, and a quarter of them are within a 20-minute walk. The second benefits public health. A mode shift to active transportation for routine short trips would make a huge contribution to stemming America's epidemic of physical inactivity, helping to mitigate many chronic diseases such as asthma, cardiovascular disease, and diabetes. About 18% of GDP is spent on health, and about 45% of that bill is paid by governments. And we found that walking and biking are already contributing $20 billion a year in healthcare costs avoided, and that could rise to $48 billion under the modest scenario and $92 billion under the substantial scenario. The third area is climate. The transportation sector is the largest contributor to US climate emissions. Connecting active transportation routes enables mode shift from cars to walking and biking, which reduces greenhouse gas emissions while providing an asset that Americans already want and need. Active transportation not only directly replaces short car trips, it also works in tandem with public transit to handle some longer trips, and it encourages compact development, which further reduces miles driven. We found that CO2 reductions from investing in active transportation could grow from 12 million tons per year to as much as 53 million tons per year under our substantial scenario. Finally, there's economic development. Active transportation is an economic boom. We have calculated direct sales associated with trails and documented the value of trail and active transportation networks to fuel tourism and to add economic vitality to regions. The net spending impact of rail trails alone could double to $21 billion per year under our substantial scenario. Considering the economic value of all the benefits that we quantified, we found that the benefit of active transportation could grow from $34 billion per year now to $74 billion under our modest scenario and $138 billion under the substantial scenario. The path to these benefits is clear. Over the past decade, states and localities across America have focused on connecting various walking and biking facilities into functional networks, connecting people to routine destinations, as well as spine trails connecting between communities and states. This is how we built railroads and roads from the start. By strategically filling the gaps in existing trail and active transportation networks, we leverage the investments we've already made to multiply the return on investment. So with that, let me turn to the panelists and ask each of you to speak briefly to the question of our research is showing transformative benefits of active transportation. How have you seen the impact of active transportation in your own experience? Why don't we start with Leslie?
Well, first of all, hello, everybody. I am the chair for the Ashta Council on Active Transportation. And my background is in planning. So I have seen the benefits of active transportation throughout my career. In fact, when I was a community planner, often walkability would be the first thing that would come up on a comprehensive plan for a municipality and what they valued and what was the number one issue for the quality of life for people who chose to live there. And we see that through our PennDOT Connects initiatives, where we have conversations before every PennDOT project. We are talking, again, we're looking at comp plans, we're looking at open space plans, we're looking at park and rec plans, as well as economic developments, freight plans. And we're seeing how does our assets, how does it act for this community, and what does the community want to be in 5, 10, 15, 20 years from now, and how can the money we're investing in the PennDOT project be invested in what that community wants to be. So what we are seeing is a lot more of active transportation requests. We're looking at walkability, obviously pedestrian safety. We're looking at bicycle access, where we have it, where we don't have it, where multi-use trails can be built alongside or within our projects. We are seeing, obviously, micromobility, which is something that the Council on Active Transportation is looking at on the national landscape. And so we're seeing how scooters are being used and biking and e-biking are being used and how that's access to public transportation, because active transportation also includes that access and accessibility issue. So we're seeing it everywhere. We're seeing where people not only want to get to places where they're going, want to have mobility options, but also can do so and take care of their health at the same time.
Thank you. Martha, do you like to go next?
Great. Good morning, everyone, as well. And a little bit of a different take than Leslie's, well, I guess similar in this way. It's hard to overestimate the positive impacts that this has provided to our communities across Montana. So I think we're similar there, but less from a planning perspective and more from the agency that oversees, trails and recreation and wildlife. We're seeing the benefits to all communities, whether large or small, whether urban or rural, and really in connecting communities, one place to another. Definitely not only the tourism business and draw, but also just general business draw and drawing talent to certain communities. And then, of course, the health benefits. And I'm thinking of, for example, the city of Butte. The trail system there, I think, has had a really strong positive impact to health there. So just hard to overestimate the positive impacts where those communities that have been able to invest in trails in Montana have seen just remarkable returns on what they've put in place there.
Thank you. And Jim, would you like to finish off this question?
Sure, yes. Thanks, Kevin. Appreciate the opportunity to be here. I think I've got a little different perspective than both Leslie and Martha, having not been serving in an operational role, and I'm bringing more of a federal perspective. But just having seen and worked, on Capitol Hill, as Kevin mentioned, seeing the interested members, not just urban members, but also members from rural areas and their interest in the innovative and interesting projects that they were working on. When we were trying to put together legislation, it's clear that these types of projects and activities have great and deep interest around the country, in all areas of the country, not just in, as I said, in urbanized areas, and really has been key to making sure that there is still a federal investment into projects that bring mode choice to all the communities around the country. So again, not having an operational role, but some little more of a 30,000-foot perspective.
Yeah, thank you all. So now we'll go into individual questions for you and pick up on some of the themes I heard you sound. So starting with you, Leslie, the Circuit Trails is one of RTC's Trail Nation projects. It's a leading national example of powerful regional trail and active transportation networks. What's been the significance of the circuit to the Philadelphia and Camden region?
Look, it's been huge. Not only is it hundreds of miles of trails where we can all be connected, and it's across state lines, it's across county lines. When I was the chair of DVRPC, the Delaware Valley Regional Planning Commission, I was able to choose 3 priorities, and one of my priorities was the circuit trails. It's giving people mobility options, sometimes in very congested areas. For instance, our Schuylkill River Trail, which follows the river that goes into Philadelphia, and then you can cross over the Delaware River into New Jersey. We at PennDOT looked at that as another mobility option. In fact, we are looking to improve that trail along with some ITS elements that we're putting onto one of our most congested corridors, our Interstate 76. We want to make sure that anybody who chooses to bike into work or to bike into the city or hike or run is able to use that trail. In addition to the miles of trail, it's also been able to fill in gaps, right? We had Chester County Trail, we had the Green Ribbon Trail, we had a lot of these trails, but they didn't connect to each other. So the circuit trail is also allowing us to do that. And of course, when you talk about it across state lines, across county lines, it also allows you to jointly apply for funding opportunities. It lets you see what resources are missing. Again, where you can collaborate and figure out ways to work on funding together, which can often be more successful, especially for federal funding when you jointly apply, as well as for state and county funding when you work with other municipalities and other entities as well. So it's been a wonderful group effort. We see these green and white circuit trail banners wherever we go. In fact, I've been to a number of ribbon cuttings of bridges and roadway improvements that often have the trail running alongside it or sometimes over it or part of the project. And that big green circuit trail banner is something I'm always proud of. And it's all over Pennsylvania and New Jersey, and really a good thing to see. And it makes us all feel connected to one another.
Okay, yeah, thank you. So I'm going to turn to Martha. Your department's responsible for the state's trail system. As a largely rural state, spine trails that connect between communities may play a particularly significant role. So how are these trails used, and how are they benefiting the state?
Again, well, actually, I don't want to take all the credit for our agency to take all the credit, because these spine trails and actually any of the trail systems we work on, it's absolutely a joint effort of many. So whether it's a city or town or local groups, every trail project we've worked on includes many partners. So sometimes we're just a collector of that, or sometimes they draw us in. But how are they used? I mean, something that is somewhat unique maybe in Montana, while the trails, people hike, stroll, bike, but we also have some motorized and non-motorized trails together. I'm thinking of the route of the Olympian that connects to the Hiawatha Trail. So, it's a combination. People use them in many ways, but certainly not just for recreation. I'm thinking of the ones around the more rural towns where people still use them for transportation. So in Montana, it's really a mix, and it depends on the place, but they're all used quite a bit. They're rarely empty.
Yeah. So staying with you, Martha, for a follow-up, the Great American Rail Trail will run from Washington, D.C. to Washington State through Montana, and it's going to be a preeminent example of a multi-use spine trail for the nation. So there are some challenging gaps to fill in Montana's segment of that nationwide trail. Will being part of the Great American help Montana in getting those trails connected?
Oh, and we need that help. I think, it's always great to be part of a bigger effort and to gain momentum from that. And I'm thinking of the example of the Headwaters Trail System, which is Three Forks outside of Bozeman. It's been incredible, I think, for all of those communities. And the impetus really was to use that as part of that nationwide trail system. And so to get that going has paid huge dividends to those communities. But sure, we need help, and where there is that momentum and feeling that it's part of this huge connection across the country, I think that's powerful and helps get other systems going as well, no doubt.
Yeah, thank you. So I'll turn back to you, Leslie. You mentioned in your opening comment about PennDOT Connects, and so my understanding is when you became Transportation Secretary, you started this program a few years ago. It was meant to improve the planning process and make it more responsive to community needs. So maybe expound a bit on what you've learned from this initiative over the last several years. What's it contributed to your state?
Sure. It was something I felt real strongly about when I came aboard here. I am the first planner to lead PennDOT. And I knew that if planning and engineering could get into the conversation on every project, where planners fully understood the engineering responsibility of these projects and the concerns, as well as the engineering fully understanding what the planners had concerns about, and if they could have conversations early on, sometimes years before they used to, before project scopes are set, before costs are set on our projects and our transportation plan, then we could really all sit around and see what could this project be for this community. As I mentioned earlier in my opening, we're looking at municipalities' comp plans, their open space plans, their park and rec plans, their freight plans, any type of plan they have. Of course, not every community has such plans already done, but the ones that do, a lot of work goes into those plans. And so we want to make sure that we're looking at the recommendations, that the decisions they're making, how they see themselves in the future, are considered in our projects. So, for example, we are doing a multi-million-dollar reconstruction of a corridor up in our Pocono region, the mountainous region. And we did not know until we went through this process that 3 counties were planning to build a multi-use county trail right alongside our corridor. Normally, we put a safety wall in as part of our corridor, which would replace the safety wall that already existed. But once we found that out, there's a steep slope on the side, and instead we designed a retaining wall, and we built a retaining wall. Now those counties were able to start that project 2 years ahead of schedule and at a lot lower price because we put the retaining wall into our program and into our project. So we were able to take some of that cost and help the counties and help the region get that trail in. We're seeing in rural areas how important things like signage, which often gets overlooked. We have one very rural area that has a large park in the middle of it. And while not a lot of traffic goes through this area, when there is an event at that park, which is quite often, definitely through the summertime, it really ties up the traffic, where you have one-way lanes in each direction, and some are dirt, not all of the areas are paved. And so just by putting up some signage to let people know in real time whether an event is at that park or not, people can choose to go straight on into the middle of town if they want to be where that activity is going on, or they can go around it now and not get caught up where there are no ways out. Once you're in it, you just can't get out of it. We're also seeing, which was a surprise, is our coordination with school districts. And we're seeing how students walk around our projects. We think we know how students walk around. We think they use the sidewalks. We think that they're going to go along paths that we've designed. But, they pop out, they cross over parking lots, they come out of backyards, they come down, paths that are not always the popular choice. And we need to take that into account because sometimes students are popping up on very busy roadways, or they're popping up and they're not crossing where we have properly signed. So we need to obviously talk to the students and let them know the safety that is at issue, and also make sure that we plan with proper lighting, with proper signage, with proper crosswalks where it is needed most. So those are just some of the examples and some of the cooperation and stakeholder collaboration we've had on PennDOT Connects, but we were really seeing that our relationships with all local stakeholders being strengthened and improved, and they also understand more of our work, which has really been something I did not expect. But obviously, when we have an emergencies, when we do have traffic incidents, when we do have issues where people, are not always at their best and they're stressed out and vulnerable, we're able to use these, again, stronger relationships and where people know who to call and when to call. And it's just really helping us maintain our entire transportation network.
Great, thanks. Very innovative work. So I'm going to turn back to Martha, and you had used the phrase in your opening talent magnet. And my understanding is the Billings, Montana Chamber of Commerce speaks of that city's trail system as the talent magnet to attract people to live there. So tell us a little more about how you see that dynamic working in the state.
Oh, I think it's something it's our job to pay attention to and support as much as we can. So we're not only trying to create more opportunities outside and recreational opportunities, recognizing how much trails can help communities, whether it's attracting talent, whether it's providing that active transportation. And I love the thought of the Vision Zero, that I think sometimes one of the barriers to active transportation is the concern about safety. So providing those trails is a helpful way to encourage that active transportation in those growing cities that are wanting to attract other companies or new companies. And then also, obviously, the health benefits. And I think about, a city like Billings or cities in Montana that are wanting to attract more diverse companies too. These kinds of opportunities are helpful in pulling in those, a more diverse workforce. So I think we should be thinking about it. It's, I think, all of our jobs who are working on trails to be paying attention to the number of different positive impacts. And it's not just recreation. It's certainly the economic and community and connective boost that's really important as well.
Yeah, thank you. So Leslie, back to you, bigger picture. You had mentioned that you chair the Active Transportation Council of Ashta. And so this is the National Association. And so from that national work, what do you see in terms of trends, in terms of how the states are approaching trails, walking and biking in relationship to the overall transportation system?
Right. Well, first of all, I really credit Ashta. Before I joined, I've been a member of Ashta for 5 years now. They started a restructuring. Now, I'm a secretary of the Department of Transportation here in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. But not that long ago, it was called the Department of Highways. And that's how Ashta was structured as well. There was such a focus on highways and streets and that type of design, geometric design and intersection design, that a lot of the other modes definitely, they were not being heard, and they were not, the concerns weren't being voiced on the same level. Now, Ashta restructured. They now have 6 active councils. One of them being active transportation. Each one is a mode. Highways and streets is one of those modes, but just one of 6 now. And so we have been the only council that has been built from the ground up over the last 2 years. The others existed in other forms, but active transportation never existed as its own entity. So over the last 2 years, we have 52 members. It's all 50 states, including DC and Puerto Rico. And we meet regularly. We met for the first time this year with the Committee on Design. We also met with some technical committees. so that we will be discussing design principles and what goes into the Green Book, which is, the engineering Bible. Everybody in transportation uses that book for design issues and how they move on to construction. And for the first time ever, the Council on Active Transportation will be balloting, which means that we will be voting for everything in that book, along with the Council of Highways and Streets. And so it will be a real collaboration like we've never seen before on the national level. And we're really excited about it. I have to give a lot of credit to the Council on Highway and Streets because they have welcomed us in open arms. In fact, the big joke is, everyone asks how hard was it to have that conversation. And I think I disappoint people when I say it really wasn't hard because the engineers, the highway and street, engineering community understand that they need to keep everybody safe. It's not only those traveling by vehicle. And that is how the conversation has been changing on the national level. Another very important thing that the council is doing is it is identifying where the gaps in research are and how the research is being collected across states. For instance, even the titles, some states have bike ped coordinators, some have active transportation planners, some have done full statewide active transportation plans, some only have bike plans. So it's divided up, and it's very hard to make comparisons when everybody is also collecting different data and collecting the data differently. So not only do we have different data points, but even if we're collecting the same type of information, we may not be calculating and analyzing it the same way. So we have put out for some research grants to help make that consistent. And I think in a few short years, we're going to have a lot of data that we can analyze, that we can compare where we are, where we need to be. And we will be able to identify exactly where those gaps are as well, and we'll be able to collect additional data. So I think we're off to a great start, and I think we're going to be in a really great place in just a handful of years.
Great, thank you for that. So taking these great perspectives on the trends in states and localities from Leslie and Martha, we're going to turn to Jim now and start to discuss the federal policy role and the opportunities going forward. Thinking about how do we make sure these things happen everywhere, not just when we have innovative state leaders, right? And so how do we take this to scale and connect the entire country, the way that we have with roads and rails? So there's a history here of federal investment in active transportation. What role has that played, as well as going forward, what are the opportunities? So my first question for you, Jim, is funding for trails, walking, and biking has been part of the federal transportation law since Ice-T in the early 1990s. And I want you to speak about what's the legacy of those federal programs that were created at that time, transportation enhancements, later called transportation alternatives, as well as the recreational trails.
Well, I think what Leslie just walked through is a big part of that legacy. For the first time, the federal government came to the table as a partner much prior to Ice-T. While there was a federal transit program, it was still very much a very highway-centric program. And with Ice-T came a number of changes to the program, including the Transportation Enhancements Program, where the federal government could really partner with local governments to try to transform their transportation systems on the ground, to try to develop and deliver networks that provide greater mode choice, safe transportation options, and opportunities to access jobs and other activities for a variety of communities. So really, it was the first time the federal government was stepping up to be a partner. And as Leslie and Martha have walked through a number of their on-the-ground examples, those are all legacies of that partnership with the federal government to work with folks around the country who are looking to build a more multimodal network.
Great. So when you worked in the House of Representatives, there were some fierce debates over the future of these programs. So why the controversy, and where is the issue now politically?
Yeah, when I was up on the Hill, it was during the MAP 21 period, so after the safety loop period. And I think it all really begins and starts with the revenue source. The Highway Trust Fund, which is about 90% of it's generated through motor fuel user fees, gas taxes, and it really led to, at a period where more money was going out than coming in, a real discussion of what is the federal role for the with this program. What are we trying to accomplish? And that revenue source, in being tied to a legacy revenue source from the 1950s, really narrowed the focus for a lot of folks in terms of what is it we should be doing in the federal level. We have limited resources. We don't have a lot of interest in growing those resources. Is it to facilitate interstate commerce, focus on the interstates, the NHS, or is it to look in a more broad fashion to provide a safe transportation system around the country, to provide transportation options? So it was a pretty fierce debate at the time. I will say it was kind of a mixed bag at the end of the day. Transportation enhancements, transit, and a number of other things that folks were trying to have funded outside of the Highway Trust Fund, they were not successful there, but we also were not successful in getting additional revenues into the Highway Trust Fund, so we ended up just getting general funds. But that creates both an opportunity in the future to hopefully get away from this argument, limited by the revenue source, the user-based revenue source. No longer is this, could be something that can be considered diversion when $143 billion has been put into the trust fund over the last decade.
Mm-hmm. So where are we now in terms of the debate for the next federal transportation bill?
Well, we're kind of, seems like we've been in the same spot here for about 10 years, at least on the federal level. We're still looking at a cliff in the Highway Trust Fund. The CBO's most recent estimate over a 10-year window is looking at $176 billion shortfall in the federal aid highway program, in federal aid highway and transit program. Congress is trying to figure out how they're going to deal with that cliff and the shortfall to be able to maintain not just current funding levels, but to really begin to invest for the future. That's obviously the hardest question to answer, and is one that a lot of people have talked about a range of things, and we could talk about some of those, but that has not really been publicly addressed in Washington. We are starting to see the authorizing committees move forward with their reauthorization proposals. We had the Senate Environment Public Works Committee move their bill through. I think it was July. They moved that through committee. They have primarily the federal aid highway piece of that. We have two other committees that, one, banking has transit, and commerce has more. They have highway safety and some broad DOT functions under their jurisdiction. All three of those have to move, as well as the finance committee, which has to answer the question about how we're going to pay for this. What we saw in the EPW committee, which is the first committee to move out, is some interesting things. They did a lot as it relates to resiliency. They did some things to reverse some reductions that we saw on the active transportation side in the last reauthorization bill, the FAST Act. We've seen them actually start to address climate change and how we're going to build a transportation system that can accommodate and deal with that moving forward. But it really did build on the legacy of ICE-T. So you still have a very formula-based program that most of the funds run through the states. So and it's all tied to very specific apportioned programs. I think in the House, Chairman DeFazio has been saying that he wants to have a bill out early next year. He has made it pretty clear that in his mind that this bill is not just going to be the same old, that it needs to be a 21st century bill, something that looks at the realities that we've seen from states like Pennsylvania and cities like DC and New York, people who've kind of filled the void. They generated some of their own revenues to fill the void from the federal level, and then also some of the innovation you're seeing in terms of, I think Leslie was talking about, what you're seeing with scooters and ride share, bike share. There's so much happening with the urban areas trying to address their mobility challenges that the federal government's trying to catch up. And I think from a Chairman DeFazio perspective, he wants to make sure that you're investing to preserve the system that we have. So there will be still strong programs to continue to invest in the interstate, but we need to try to look at what are the mobility and access needs going forward. What do we need to do to build a resilient system that acknowledges climate change, that addresses the safety needs of the system? So I think you're going to see, or at least his intention would be that the committee will move forward with a bill that will take us in a different direction, building on the legacy, but then adding some pieces to try to make sure we're adapting a system that meets the needs of communities and then in the traveling public.
Yeah, thanks, Jim. So our Rails Trails is trying to seize that opportunity for meaningful transportation reform that Jim just mentioned. Let me just say a few words about that, and then we'll turn to audience questions for all the panelists. So we really see demand for trail and active transportation networks as bubbling up across America, and Congress planted a seed for this transformation by creating the non-motorized pilot project back in 2005, which proved that focused investment in filling gaps in active transportation networks can shift car trips to walking and biking. And now we feel that Congress needs to return to that task of taking that success to scale by becoming a full partner with the states and localities to create a nationwide network of trails and active transportation. And we've heard today some powerful examples of how that's beginning to happen in states and localities where there's great innovative leadership. So we're calling on Congress to pass essentially a visionary federal transportation reauthorization. And from the active transportation side, we think this requires a doubling of funding in the next bill and improvement of policies, which would include investing $500 million a year in active transportation network connections to put people, together with their routine destinations within communities, as well as having spines, trails that connect between communities and between states. There's that interstate commerce that Jim talked about. And then we want to increase the Transportation Alternatives Program funding to ensure that those baseline resources remain available and well implemented in every state. And we also want to triple funding for the Recreational Trails Program to reflect the recreational fuel taxes that are collected and provide necessary funding for maintenance. And so this is something that all these things are everyone can help with. We need to send a clear message to Congress that America needs investment in active transportation networks. And to do that, you can go to railstotrails.org/trailstransform to see our resources that would help you in spreading the word. And with that, I want to turn to audience questions. All right, so the first question comes from North Carolina, and it says that we live in a small town. How can federal funding connect transportation with housing, medical clinics, grocery stores, etc.? Who would like to take a first shot at that?
I'll start. We're working on non-emergency medical transportation right now is a big topic for us, especially obviously in our rural areas. We work with the Department of Health on that. So that is obviously, really important. We're also seeing, especially in our rural areas, Pennsylvania has the highest number of operating railroads at 64. And the next state, I think, is down at 50. So it's much higher than most states. And with all of those railroad crossings, there's danger, right? All those at-grade crossings on our trails, and as well as on, our roadways where people are traveling by car. So we're taking a look at including automated and connected technology of how when someone is on a trail, and we had an awful fatality here in Pennsylvania where a child was on a trail and at a grade crossing was hit, and it was a fatal accident. And so we're taking a look. It's the trucking traffic at these crossroads, but also the rail traffic at these crossroads. And so any type of federal funding that would help us make those crossings safer would be also very much welcome. And then I'll just end with, we see the connection with housing. We see the connection I had, and while this was in a larger urban area, but I think you can see the relevance here. I got to pitch to Amazon for 2 different cities, for Pittsburgh as well as Philadelphia. And I can tell you that housing, transportation, and workforce are very tightly tied together. And they were only interested in looking at areas where their workforce could not only get to work with a variety of options, but could also get out to trails, could get out to recreate in ways after work so that their quality of life was high. And I think more and more employers, wherever they locate, they are looking at those types of investments and the type of quality of life that their employees can have. You know, the happier their employees are, the better off I'm sure their bottom line is. I'm sure the data shows that. And so they're very much concerned on providing as many quality of life improvements and options to their employees as well.
All right. Anybody else want to jump in on that, or shall I go to the next question? All right, I'll go to the next question. So, Martha, this one is for you. You had mentioned Vision Zero and safety issues, and it seemed, you know, as they relate to trails. Do you see this idea of providing infrastructure that is separated from car traffic as being an important part of the safety equation?
Good question. I think you guys are more experts in that, but it strikes me that having that opportunity to have it be separate is something that encourages more people to get out, and it makes it more accessible. But I don't think it's always feasible to have it all separated. I mean, I think there are those connector trails and allowing people to navigate even throughout a town. I mean, the previous question, I heard that too, is, you know, how do we have a way to get to the grocery store or to the hospital or to medical services? So ideally, yes, but I think it's two parts. It's also allowing for, you know, that active transportation in a safe way, not just on these separate trails. But certainly Fish, Wildlife, and Parks, we have been more focused on the trail systems, the front country, back country, and the urban connector trails, and have been less engaged in the transportation conversation. Does that answer the question?
Sure. Yeah. So let me pick up on this this word access. So you've all spoken powerfully to the idea of connections providing access for everybody, but how does accessibility for people with disabilities play in? Are there federal funding sources available to help with for persons with disabilities?
Yeah, I'll start on that one. Before we leave the last topic, though, one thing I would like to add is I was fortunate enough to go with a group of DOT secretaries from across the country to Copenhagen, where they have a lot of those protected for bikes, for walking. They also have separate lanes for just buses in certain areas, and you definitely get around that city a lot differently than we do here, and it does give you a sense of safety. And I biked as well as walked around that city. And I have to say, as a participant, where appropriate, I think we should look for those protected lanes, because I think it does. I know it made me feel better and safer, even with trucks, you know, when they're off and separated. It is a very good thing. So that's good. And so, Kevin, just one more, as I got onto that, remind me the question I was supposed to answer.
Well, actually, I've got a follow-up that I think will dovetail nicely, because basically it's a question about multimodal use. And I know Pennsylvania, in its own state transportation program, has a multimodal fund. And then you had mentioned earlier about the effectiveness of the circuit and helping jurisdictions come together and apply for funding together. And I know some of those successes have been at the federal level, where New Jersey side and the Pennsylvania side have gotten together and gone to the federal government and gotten Tiger grants, or now called Build grants. But you know, some of that's pretty innovative in that region got several Tiger grants over the years to help with that project. So maybe comment on what you see as the role of multimodalism going forward, and how that relates to our conversation today.
Sure. And I remember we were talking about persons with disabilities as well earlier. So yeah, it's all important. We want to give everybody, seniors, people where mobility is challenging, and that definitely includes persons with disabilities. We want to give everybody as many options as we can. And as far as going after multimodal grants, again, across state lines and across other jurisdictions, it's truly important. For example, in the Philadelphia area, we've been able to go after a grant where we are putting a cap over I-95, where I-95 separated a big part of Philadelphia from the river, which is on the other side. I think this is very common when the interstate system came in the 50s. It just was built and placed down, and at that time, the environmental regulations that we have now and other community issues that we would discuss now, we wouldn't imagine doing a new project without talking to the communities. That just wasn't what happened in the 50s. And so we have a lot of communities that have been literally separated by concrete from where people live, and then sometimes it's industry on the other side. For us, we have a port on the other side, but we also have access to a beautiful river. And so we are able to put this cap on a piece of I-95 where we are adding an 11-acre park. We will be connecting people to the river, to the waterfront, which will really add an amenity, and also join trails for walking as well as biking in the Philadelphia area. We'll connect to our historic district. You'll be able to walk to the Liberty Bell. You'll be able to walk to Independence Hall, the Constitution Center. And you'll be able to have a really enjoyable, not just day, but number of days, right, in Philadelphia. And you'll be able to have all different modes of transportation and getting around. And you'll be able to access it, whether you get around with a cane, with a walker, and a wheelchair. If you, have visibility challenges, there will also be opportunities. Obviously, all of our signals are upgraded, and we have sounds that are associated with them, as well as for those who are hard of hearing. And so we're taking into account everybody and what they need. Again, the conversations of PennDOT Connects is giving us an awareness that is consistent across the entire state when we do our projects. And so we want to keep everybody in mind, give everybody as many options as we can, and at every moment, making sure safety is, the number one priority and keeping everybody mobile.
Thank you. So back to Martha with this question. It's how is Montana working across agencies, yours, the DOT in your state, and other agencies, to ensure safe, active transportation? And is there anything in your experience there that you might suggest as a model for other states?
Well, I certainly, it's funny, as I sit here, I think Director Tooley, our director of the Department of Transportation, maybe she ought to be here. I thought about that the other day. She should be sitting here next to me because we work together so much. And so we coordinate all the time. And I think some of the, again, barriers that we maybe had in the past amongst our agencies are not present now. And that's really, I guess that's just due largely to his leadership, and then those around him who have really reached out to us. So we work with Department of Transportation all the time. I can't imagine not working with them, but we also have to and want to be working with the cities and towns, the Association of Counties. I mean, working with local governments. And sometimes we follow DOT's lead in that as well, because both agencies are used to working with partners quite a bit, but we have always done so in sort of our own way. So I think I'm thinking of Vision Zero, and then also we've been working on wildlife corridors, transportation corridors, and we've been doing that hand in hand with Department of Transportation. So there isn't one lead, where the two agencies are really working together in that with partners. So I did any conversation we're going to have, anything that comes up, I mean, we are always coordinating with our sister agency, Department of Transportation. So how could that help others do that? I mean, I think it's just reaching out and developing those relationships that maybe didn't exist in the past in some states, and that's been it really for us. It's that we have this common vision, and that's been enough for us to want to work together.
Nice, thank you. So Jim, turning to you, what do you think it would take for Congress to be motivated to dig really deep on these issues?
Well, I think hearing from constituents and people who have examples of projects, like I said, when I was on the Hill, even though we were having a fight that, tended to at least get perceived as urban versus rural, a lot of these projects, I mean, look at, the conversation we're having with both Leslie and Martha about projects in Montana and in rural Pennsylvania. And there's important projects that are happening, all over the country. So I think the more people are talking to their representatives about these projects so that it's localized, it isn't just some big abstract, folks who, bike to work in Washington, D.C. It's, people who, need to have, they want to recreate maybe in Montana, or they need to get to work in Butte. I think those are, examples that I don't think people in Washington think of in terms of what it is these programs can achieve. And if I could just go back real quick on some of the last couple questions, the focus on multimodal, I think misses a little bit of the point. Is something my former boss, Chairman Oberstar, used to talk about. To him, it was always about being intermodal, not multimodal. How do these things work together? And a lot of people who take transit may walk to the transit. They may take a bus to transit. They may bike to transit, but rarely are they taking just one mode to get to work. So he always liked, how do you work so that you get out of the siloed mentality and really try to plan and build a system where all the different modes in agencies, is just going back to Martha's example in Montana, how do they all work together to get to an outcome? And if that outcome's access to healthcare or access to jobs or economic activity, I mean, how are these pieces fitting together? And you're really focused on the outcome to transform, not just where's the money coming from and here are the constraints on those funds.
All right. So, okay, I now have an edgy question for any or all of you, and this has to do with how to think about federal funding in the transportation reauthorization. What do you think would have the bigger impact? Spending more money on active transportation, or perhaps spending less money on highway expansion, is the way this has been put. But you could, play with that question a little bit too, in terms of just thinking about how that money is spent and any way that money has been spent in the past that may have made it more difficult to safely get around by walking or biking. But which of those places would you focus first is the question.
I'll take a stab at it.
Okay.
First of all, I want to start off, and I'm not trying to take the safe road here, but I just want to be clear that we are severely underfunded in both areas. So I don't want to assume that we have enough right now for highway investment, and to take even a penny away would be, it would cause a lot of issues right here in Pennsylvania. We should be investing $1.2 billion a year in just our interstates alone, and we're barely able to invest $500 million. So every year we are falling behind by $700 million a year. So I would hate to take away, because we already cannot make the changes, the investments, the reconstruction projects, or the corridor improvements that we would want to. Now, as far as active transportation, yes, I do think we need more. I think we definitely need more flexibility. I think we need to have more money to invest. As far as investing, in trails, I was on a panel, and I don't remember the exact data, but maybe someone here knows it. But I believe, particularly in cities, the majority of car trips are under 3 miles. So when people get in their car to go somewhere in a city, whether it's a movie theater, whether it's the grocery store, whether It's to visit a friend. It is, a very high percentage, and I wish I could remember the number. It's under 3 miles. So who wouldn't hop on a bike or who wouldn't walk if they felt they had a safe, way to get there by bike or by walking? So I think obviously, it would be invest in active transportation. But I do have to put in a plea, please don't take anything from highways, because trust me, we already do not have enough, and taking anything away from that, our whole system would definitely suffer.
Yeah, I just want to agree with that. I mean, I think it's hard, if we put it into a zero-sum context, it's just nobody's going to end up being a winner. I mean, really, we need to be investing across all the modes. All the modes need to be working together to drive towards performance-based outcomes, to accomplish the goals we're setting for the system and for mobility and access and safety. And if we're in a zero-sum contest, nobody's going to end up a winner.
Okay, thanks. This next question has to do with how can we do a better job of helping people understand the economic value that walking and biking and trails bring to their lives? And do you see this as related to incentivizing more people to get out there and engage in active transportation?
I can jump into this one in that how do we help people understand the economic benefit of getting everyone out? I'm hugely hopeful for the RX movement, the health benefits of getting everybody out. And so how can more doctors prescribe getting out for a walk? How can more of us talk about how it really does help our health? That getting into that era, which is new for fish and wildlife agencies, fish, wildlife, and parks agencies to some degree, I think could be a game changer. Really talking about those health benefits. So I think that's one way to just keep those connections going and to work more in a more coordinated fashion with hospitals, healthcare providers, so that we are connecting all of our efforts there.
Thank you. And actually, this is maybe going back to what Leslie had just been saying about the needs in all areas. And part of that need is maintenance across all modes, is it not? Making sure that all our infrastructure is in a state of good repair is a significant part of the needs we have.
Yes.
Yeah.
I don't know who's answering that, but absolutely. And we often hear when we had those conversations with planners and engineers, where the disconnect was with the cost of maintenance. Like that was often the reason we were given as to why something couldn't happen, why we couldn't build a trail somewhere, why we couldn't put a sidewalk somewhere. It was the maintenance of keeping the snow off that area, of keeping the area safe and having a smooth ride for people. So we started doing pilots so we could get real numbers on what that maintenance means and what the true cost is. And guess what? In most cases, we found it wasn't as costly as perceived, right? But the perception is real. I do want to just put out there our current president. Well, actually, he just finished his term. Utah DOT Director Carlos Braceras, who was the president of Ashta. Every president gets to pick priorities, and he picked communication as one. And they are in the middle of putting out a report, but it looks at specifically at what you just asked us, the economic benefits of transportation as well as the quality of life benefits. And how do we message that? Because as an industry, we really have not done a great job messaging that. So I just want to throw out a few things. I happened this morning to talk to a group on the specific report, so I have it as top of mind, but it will be very interesting as this report gets into its final its final form. I just want to throw out a few things. So it talked about job growth. It talked about economic expansion. It talked about labor force, reduced congestion, how we can attract, maintain talent, and of course the economic benefits of tourism were just a few of the things that it mentioned. And so it'll be very interesting as that report gets finalized and more research and surveys are being done, and to get those message points across. How do we talk about it so that when Jim is commenting on how Congress puts up the votes or why they want, like how are people talking about the need? Because I think that does need to change, and it needs to be more directed toward both of those things, the economic development, the quality of life, for us to get those tough votes that are hard to make to increase transportation revenue.
Thank you. So the last question turns out to be for me in the call to action I gave earlier, and it's whether Rails to Trails issues advocacy alerts when the time is right. The answer to that is yes, and you can sign up at railstotrails.org/Trails Transform. And with that, I want to thank everybody who listened in, as well, especially as our panelists, Leslie Richards, Martha Williams, and Jim Kolb. Thank you all.